Welcome to Old Path and our study through the Old Testament. We do here on Mondays. We are currently in the book of Song of Solomon, or what is known as the Song of Solomon. And we're really only taking 2 weeks in this for reasons I'll explain here in just a moment. But very briefly, we're going to take on the topic of types in the Bible, and as far as like the apologetics is concerned. And the problem we run into that oftentimes is when it comes to matters of things like types and symbols and metaphor and all that stuff, like what we're seeing a lot of here in the Song of Solomon, people take it too far and they actually read things into it. But there is a way that the Bible teaches things by types. And so in a number of places you have exactly that. And we had an example of one that came up yesterday morning at church, a church that I attend here. I'm not the pastor there. This is my pastoral work. What I do here on Mondays and on Thursdays, this is what I do. This is where I get to teach through the Bible, but I'm just part of the congregation on Sunday mornings, and we are currently going through the book of 2 Samuel. And I want to look at some types that are there that really helps us to understand when the Bible, because we'll get this critique from people all the time. If we try to read things literally, oftentimes we'll be met by people that don't really want to look at it that way, and they'll say, well, the Bible speaks in symbols and types and metaphor and all that kind of stuff. And when you're careful to look at it, you'll see obviously that there are those times when the Bible uses types or metaphor or symbols, and it's clearly explained, usually immediately thereafter, or it's pretty obvious what's there. So most of the time, when people try to take something that's pretty obviously literal and try to make it symbolic of something else, it's because they have ulterior motives. And I want to get into that as an apologetic topic at the end of this. And so we will get to that when we're completed with the Song of Solomon. So this is 8 chapters. And I didn't get much into the construction of it. Again, if you're interested in it, there's a lot that you can go and look at as far as the structure is concerned, and a lot of different ways that this is interpreted. And I will, again, kind of give a brief rundown of how I view it and why I'm taking the approach of just going through it very, very quickly. There's really not a lot to quote unquote interpret if we're looking at this in the literal sense, because it uses an insane amount of imagery and, of course, metaphor and types and symbols and all that kind of stuff. So it's incredibly poetic. There are a number of different people that are involved in the dialogue, but the two primaries is the husband and the wife. So the way that this is approached by many people is that it's really trying to speak in a symbolic way of something else. And I mentioned this last week. There are those that would try to say that symbolically we're speaking about the male representing representing Jesus, and that the church is represented by the wife, the Shulamite woman. And, people will do that, and I think it's a really bad take on the actual book itself for a couple of reasons, because, of course, it goes right past the idea that this would be Solomon and someone else, this woman that we don't know who she is. We don't know which one of his wives this was. But some of the interaction between the two of them has nothing whatsoever to do with the church. And it doesn't, because it's clearly very physical and very, very human, very earthly, very even carnal. And I'm sorry, but we're stretching it so far to try to make that fit. So if you want to say, well, there are some applications to this about the love relationship that Jesus has with the church in the true sense about, the way that he adores his bride, that's about as far as you can get, because once it steps over into the physical, you're reading so much into the text, you're just kind of doing violence to it. So I've never bought into that. And for the same reasons, I would never buy into the idea that this is supposed to be emblematic and symbolic of the relationship that God had with Israel, which would be the Old Testament view of this that some would have. But again, that idea that you're trying to do so much in the way of symbols and all the rest of it, and that it's somehow speaking past the original audience to ages down the road, I'm sorry, I just don't see it there. Some see in the very last chapter that there is, because there are so many people commenting in this last chapter, that there are some that think, is this really just some kind of a drama or a play? And it's almost like the script to that. And again, if that was the case, this would be the shortest play on record. So I don't believe that that's the case either. What I believe and why God would preserve this, and again, this is one of the questions for somebody that would listen to my take on this, is that, well, if it really is, just as you're saying, Chris, and there's no imagery here, it's relating to Jesus and the church or God and Israel, then why would it be here in the text if, again, Solomon being who he is, and having what he had as far as wives and all the rest of that, then why is it possibly in here? And my simple answer to that question is this would be put forward as the ideal. And again, it starts to get into how then do we account for the timing when it was written, because we do know that after much time, or after some time after he became king, he became embroiled with so many different people that would call him husband, or the concubines that he would have, all told over 1,000 or at 1,000. So clearly what we see here would give the impression of what the ideal would be: one man, one woman, a married couple who are absolutely in love with one another and very, very much involved in every particular way. They don't look to anyone else. There's no one else that compares to them. In the case of Solomon, by the time that it got to its pinnacle of 1,000, it is really, really hard to look at this and say, yeah, he didn't have any dealings with any of the rest of them. We know that he did, because what we read there in the 2 Kings passage, chapter 11, the wives that he had turned his heart from the Lord to follow after idols and the things that they had brought with them from these foreign nations. So he had obvious dealings with them. And so this gives rise to why some people talk about polygamy and that you can have multiple wives and all the rest of it. See, Solomon did and David did, and they have all their reasons, but you can see the problem with it and why it wouldn't be a good idea as far as practice is concerned, because there's no way that you're going to look at the Song of Solomon and say, outside of a single husband and a single wife who are absolutely committed to one another and devoted to one another and really taken by one another, I'm sorry, it just falls apart after that when you have an accumulation of them. And again, what Paul would have to say to both Timothy and Titus about the leadership in the church, just the ones serving as bishops and deacons would be the men of one wife, the husbands of one wife. So there is a lot of debate and a lot of discussion that goes on with that. But from my take on this and how I view this and how I'm preparing it and how I'm actually presenting it, I should say, this would be the ideal. And if this actually existed at one time where Solomon did actually, at the exclusion of all others, looked at this one particular woman, then this may very well be early on as far as being king, before he started to be mainly think about this, that the idea of wives and concubines and why you would gather them, they're usually presented by kings and people in very high authority as marry my daughter. There's political reasons for it. There's, being close to the king. It's basically almost given as gifts. So women, as we think about it in the 21st century West, the idea of how women were kind of almost marketed at times in the past is really pretty amazing. And is this God's ideal? Absolutely not. Again, if there was the idea of a multitude of wives for a husband, then God would have created more than just Eve for Adam. Because again, that's your prototype. That's what it was, and that's how it should have been all along. That was when God created everything in the beginning, one husband, one wife, children were to follow, and that was to be a generational thing. Well, it got perverted, obviously, by a number of people, and it was basically something that you would see much more as far as the culture was concerned. And that's a good example of why culture should never, ever find its way into the dealings of the believer in God, because he gives the ideal. So I think what we're looking at here is the idealistic. This is how it should be: one husband, one wife, devoted to one another. And that's fine. At that point, you could basically say, if this really was Solomon's entire life, and that he spent his entirety of his life having married somebody of his youth and then kept with her for the entirety of his life, devoted like this, man, this would be a different book. But again, we know what we know about him and the compromise that took place. And so we can read through this and say, great, this is idealistic. This is how it ought to be. And yet it was not this way in Solomon's life to some degree or another. Again, the Bible doesn't dedicate a ridiculous amount of time to who he is and what his life was as far as this kind of thing is concerned. So again, it's one of those things, I'll be honest with you. When I study through this and then not just reading it myself, but then presenting it, there's some stuff that's, to me, I'm a pretty conservative guy, a little bit on the cringy side, just to even read it and put it out there. So this was why it wasn't a book that I ever taught like on a Sunday night, to the congregation that was there, assembled at the church, mainly because my audience is very, very much mixed at the time. You would have some married couples, no question about it, and that works great. So if this was something that you wanted to bring up in sections of this at a couples retreat or something like that, man, that works great. But as far as just the general congregation, there's a lot of this stuff that would probably make people feel a little on the uncomfortable side, and it may not have the slightest bit of relevance to them because they're not married, or they're widowed or widowers, or they're just younger people, they're single, whatever it may be. Then you can start looking at this. Okay, well, one day down the road, if I get married, this is how it should be. So those don't work really, really well. So why am I doing it now? Well, if people don't want to listen to or watch the Song of Solomon, even though it's only 2 weeks, if they don't want to watch these videos or listen to the audio of it, they can skip right past it. I wouldn't want to tell people back at the church, hey, for the next couple of weeks, we're going to go through the Song of Solomon. So if you're not interested, check out. I really would want to make this to the entirety of the church at all times, and that's why we go through it. So once again, the last thing I'll say on this, I will never question why God, in his wisdom, by the guidance of the Holy Spirit, instructed to have this be accompanied as part of the Old Testament. This is the Lord's work product. And so what we have in front of us, the 66 books of the Bible, this is what God intended to be his Bible, his word to mankind. Song of Solomon is in it. Once again, if that's the case, then I can look at this as the ideal husband and wife relationship. This is how it ought to be. And as far as the imagery, once again, if it's husbands and wives looking at this, then great. They look at this and say, that's how our way of looking at one another ought to be. This is the ideal. The other stuff, man, I'm telling you, if you read some of the things that people have read into this, it gets to the point of innuendo, to the point of even pornographic. And I just don't see that that's God's way in a sanctified way and glorifying himself to do something salacious. It's just not in his makeup, so I don't address it that way. So again, people can interpret this any way that they like to. It's why I'm not taking a great deal of time, because again, it's more like when they're describing one another. When he's describing her and she's describing him, it's all this flowery language, lots of you're like this and you're like that. And really, some of this stuff is kind of idiomatic in ways that we probably don't even fully grasp. We don't know the locations of places where they compare one another to this, that, or the other thing. And I'll be honest with you, I'm going to try to keep it together. There are a couple of times where if you said this to your wife, you husbands, and you compared this to that, they'd look at you like, what on earth are you talking about? Is that an insult? To the person writing it and the person hearing it, this must have sounded like the highest of praise. So I'm sorry, but there are some times where you read stuff in here and you just kind of, okay, I don't think I'd ever say that to my wife, but we're going back 3,000 years and it would have sounded different to them. So we're going to be in chapter 5. We're going to begin there today. Once again, if you have any questions about anything in the studies that we have here, you can contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net. There is an email link that you can have there in the drop-down menu. We still have room on the trip to Israel. It is getting very, very close. We're only about a month and a half from our departure time, and we'd love to have you with us. There is still time, but you need to contact me like right away. So you can do that through the email. If you're not a subscriber on the YouTube page, or YouTube channel rather, you can do that as well, and it'll let you know about the content that we put out here. So, Song of Solomon, we're going to be in chapter 5. Let's open up with a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at the text. Father, we thank you once again for the time that we can spend in your word, and for those who are studying through the Song of Solomon. especially as husbands and wives, that we may look through this and recognize the idealistic way that this is. And again, if there are times that that we read through this, even as husbands and wives, and find that there might be inconsistencies with how we view our spouse, we ask, Lord, that this would challenge us. So we give you all thanks, we give you all praise, and we ask that you would glorify yourself through the teaching of your word. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so as we get into this, and I won't dwell on it a whole lot, the places where there is some stuff that you almost look at it as a little cringy when you see the things that are said there. I don't ever want to use that as an excuse to say, well, then it must not be literal. It must be speaking about something else. And then unfortunately, people start to read so much into it. And so it is interesting when you go and read some scholars, some commentators on this, if you're the type that reads through commentaries, and again, I looked through them on this one just out of curiosity for a couple of things. There are some that believe that every verse of this is really speaking symbolically of Jesus and the church. And so every verse, they're going to try to take that in their application of it. Again, I tend to just not buy into that whole theory and view of looking at the text. So again, as we finish this out, it should be obvious that that's kind of my view of this. So chapter 5 says this. Now it really is accompanying verse 16. It's where awake, O north wind. This is again him speaking. This would be the Solomon speaking here. And it goes on to say this. The bride says at the end of verse 16, let my beloved come to his garden and eat its pleasant fruits. And some people see that as of innuendo of the consummation of the marriage, and yet there's some wording in the beginning of this chapter, and these really do, again, it's been broken down into chapters, and sometimes I don't think it's been done correctly, but it's a continuing thought because it's basically a call and response here. So she's giving the invitation. He's already given the invitation as well. And if we're looking at this as the actual marriage itself, it makes sense where he says, I have come to my garden. So she first of all says, come to your garden. She calls to him and he says, well, I've come to the garden. I've gathered with myrrh. I have gathered my myrrh and my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with the honey, and I have drunk the wine of my with my milk. Eat, O friends, drink, yes, drink deeply, O beloved ones. Now, there's a lot of ways that people look at that, but if we keep this at the idea that they're now coming to the place of marriage, then this would be the invitation to the people that are there, and the idea that all preparations have been made, and now they're coming to the point of marriage, okay? There is this interval, again, if people had already thought that they're married at this point, and what we're talking about in the previous verses at the end of the chapter and into this is now they've come to the point of consummation, and they see all of the metaphor that, well, this really means that, and it's about the wedding night and the bedroom and all the carnal stuff. Well, right here, she's in the response talking about a dream that she is having, and it gives the impression that they're still at this place of betrothal or engagement. So again, if people are going to take the time to look into this so far, when you really can't make the case one way or the other, I'm not investing, I'll be honest with you, all honesty, I'm not investing that much time into trying to figure all that stuff out because everybody's tried to do it. And again, there are more interpretations about this book than any other that I know of, probably even more so than Revelation. So the idea that one person is going to read it and have it all figured out, okay. If you think that you're that person and you think that you've got it all figured out, then great. So she says, I sleep, but my heart is awake. It is the voice of my beloved, and he is knocking, and here is what he is saying. He says, open for me, my sister, my love, which we find that's a repeating statement. My dove, my perfect one, for my head is covered with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night. And so it's like she's dreaming and he's at the door knocking and asking that she would open, that he could come in. This is a dream that she's having. So it says this in verse 3, I have taken off my robe, and how can I put it on again? I have washed my feet. How can I defile them? My beloved put his hand by the latch of the door, and my heart yearned for him. I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the lock. So, if this is all the metaphor, is the preparation that in her dream she's ready to let him into the room, and yet for whatever reason there's enough of a delay that we get to verse 6, I opened that door. So she's there in preparation, and again all the imagery about being perfumed and all the rest of it. And verse 6, I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and had gone. My heart leaped up when he spoke. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, and he gave me no answer. And so when she starts to talk about the watchman, it would mean that she's gone out looking for him beyond just opening of the door. He's not there. Whatever reason, for as she would see it, her delay, she's going to go looking for him. Well, here's what happens. The watchmen went about the city, and they found me. They struck me. They wounded me. The keepers of the walls took my veil away from me. So, in her dream, she pursues after him. The people who actually find her wandering looking for him don't understand who she is, and they mistreat her. So again, all in the sense of a dream. So verse 9, these are known as the daughters or her attendants. They've been throughout this. It says, now, what is your beloved? They say to her. These are her attendants, her maidens. More than anyone else, beloved, O fairest among women, what is your beloved more than other beloved that you so charge us? So why is it that you're asking us to be involved? Why is he so different than all the rest? So then verse 10, they continue, my beloved is white and ruddy, or I'm sorry, the way that she would describe him. Why are you looking for him? Why is he better than everyone else? Now she's going to give this description. My beloved is white and ruddy, chief among 10,000s. His head is like the finest of gold. His locks are wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the rivers of waters, washed with milk and fitly set. So goes a long ways into saying, well, here's his physical description. Now, not just that you should go look, but she's answering the question, what makes him different? So his cheeks are like a bed of spices, banks of scented herbs. His lips are lilies, dripping liquid myrrh. His hands are like rods of gold, set with beryl. His body is carved ivory, inlaid with sapphires. His legs are like pillars of marble, set on bases of fine gold, and his countenance is like Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His mouth is most sweet. Yes, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. So here's your answer. She gives this glowing report of what he looks like and why she finds him so attractive. You know, what makes him different? That's the question. Well, here's what makes him different. And she's speaking outwardly mainly. So this is his physical appearance. And so again, this is one of those cool things. If you're going to look at this, again, in the idealistic sense, there's been a couple of times when I've had weddings that I've done all the premarital counseling with them. We come to the wedding day, and they get a chance to see one another for the first time. And you can see that when it usually happens with the husband, and I'll always make it a point. When I see that, if he is a person who is just completely taken by it, you'll see it on his face. I've had husbands that are, before they take their vows, who when they first see their wife for the very first time actually break down. Not like a full-blown can't keep it together kind of a thing, but you can see they're overwhelmed with emotion. They'll tear up, and I just think that's the coolest thing ever. And I'll mention it to him, not to embarrass him, put him on the spot, but it's like I'll always remind him, hey, remember this day. When you saw her for the very first time like this walking down the aisle, don't ever look at her in any other way. Let it be that way always. And it's the same thing. So husbands, wives, looking at one another in that same way, you basically want to say, I don't care what time does to that person. Beth and I are 39 years married at the end of this month. And so I don't probably look anywhere near what I did when we first were married, but I would certainly hope that Beth still sees me the same way. That's how it ought to be. Again, the ideal. As day one, it should be the same as the 39th year with us. And, again, for every couple, this should be the same way. So she gives this description. Now, The maidens, the ones who attend to her, say this: "Where has your beloved gone, O fairest among women?" So they're addressing her. "Where has your beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with you?" So they're offering their help in this. And then so she replies, "My beloved has gone to his garden, to the beds of spices." And again, so many people look at different views of this. And if this was just the marriage chamber, there's really no problem for them to say, well, that's where he is. If that's what the bed of spices and all the rest of it means, she doesn't need to go looking for him. She knows where that would be. So this is probably speaking of something completely outside where she doesn't actually know where he is. So she said, the beds of spices, to feed his flock in the gardens, and to gather lilies. So she knows general area, but not exactly where. "I am my beloved's, and my beloved's is mine. He finds his flock among the lilies." Now, she is now then praised by him as he hears this. "Oh, my love, you are more beautiful than Tisra." Tisra being a city and a location in an area to the north of Jerusalem, miles north of Jerusalem. "You are lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners." And so you don't think of a wife as being awesome like an army with banners unless you get the imagery, something that is the inspiring of awe. If you're seeing an entire army arrayed with banners, you're just taken by the whole thing. So it's not that she reminds him of an army of men, it's just that initial awe. So "Turn your eyes away from me, for they have overcome me. Your hair is like a flock of goats." So this is her once again. This is him speaking of her. And so he says, "Your hair is like locks of goats going down from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep which have come up from the washing. Every one bears twins, and none of them is barren. There's none barren among them." That's imagery that's already been said before, back in chapter 4. "Like a piece of pomegranate are the temples behind your veil," meaning like more like the cheeks. So this is once again physical description of the person that he's looking at as his beloved, the Shulamite. So their eyes, there are rather 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one. So at this point, that's a small number compared to what he ultimately had. So some would see that as that, well, it's still very early on. It's before there's 1,000. He just has them here in numbering over 100, but she's still the only one. But to what extent he had relations with them, really, once again, if you have another wife and you have concubines, there's usually going to be all kinds of conjugal things that go on with it, or carnal things. So it's one of those types of things where you go, yeah, they speak as though you're the only one for me, and yet with Solomon there were others, and that obviously that rivaling is never a healthy thing. Now, I've never watched an episode of it, but I've seen advertisements, it's been for years, where they've looked into the lives of people that are polygamists. It's one husband with a number of wives, and it all sounds, they all, at the beginning of the season, or at the beginning of when they first started advertising for it, it's like, we're all one big happy family. By the end of it, it's a train wreck, and some of the ladies have left because it's divided allegiance. And it's pretty hard for one person to say, I'm the only one, while the other ones are saying the same thing, and here's this guy. It's just, frankly, I'll say it straight up, it's just dirty. There's no way that you can say that I am given to someone else, and yet there's a multitude of those people. It just doesn't work out well in our modern day. And here, again, how did it work out for Solomon? Spiritually speaking, it was a train wreck. Whatever else it may have been, we don't get a lot of the details. So, but you're the only one. Even with all the wives and concubines, you're the only one. Okay. Verse 10, who is she who looks forth as, again, Solomon speaking about her. Who is she who looks forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, awesome as an army with banners? And that's something he's used before. And she says, I went down to the garden of nuts to see the verdure of the valley, and that's the fruit, the greenery. wanting to see the evidence of the vitality and the greenness of it, to see whether the vine had budded or the pomegranates had bloomed. Before I was even aware, my soul had made me as the chariots of a noble people. So again, the imagery gives the impression this is all of the preparation, all leading up to the idea of the marriage and all of the things that will go on as a result of married couples. Okay, verse 13, once again, the attendants speak, return, return, O Shulamite, return that we may look upon you. And she says, what would you see in the Shulamite? So the discussions between the woman to be married and her attendants. Now, they say this to her, how beautiful are your feet in sandals, O princess daughter. The curves of your thighs are like jewels, the work of your hands of a skillful woman. And this is not Solomon speaking about her. These are the people who are helping her prepare for the wedding, and this is what she looks like. And this is, again, one of those places that's like, all right, I get it. The imagery is 3,000 years old. And the descriptions that they're giving here are probably not the things, if you're talking about the model bride nowadays, would anybody want anybody to say of them, this is what you remind me of, and this is when we look at you, this is what we see. So we'll take that from the second part of verse 1. The work of your hands is a skillful workman. Your navel is a rounded goblet. It lacks no blended beverage. Your waist is a heap of wheat set about with lilies, and your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower, and your eyes like pools of Heshbon by the gate of Beth Rabim. And your nose is like the Tower of Lebanon, which looks towards Damascus. So once again, it's like their imagery is different than ours. So everybody's concerned about what their nose looks like. People get surgeries to try to make them less. The idea that yours is like a tower, we just don't really understand the imagery. Pardon me for chuckling, but it's just kind of interesting. So your head crowns you like Mount Carmel. And again, Carmel is a whole series of, they would call them mountains. They're just to us kind of hillsides. And they're at the northwestern corner of the Jezreel Valley. And there are a number of them. Think Elijah and the prophets of Baal. That's Carmel. So the bridegroom, she now speaks in reply to all of these things. Oh, I'm sorry. Verse 5, let me finish that out. That your head is like the crowns you like Mount Carmel. That idea that it sits above a valley and it's beautiful to behold. And your hair, the hair of your head is like purple. A king is held captive by your tresses or your locks. Just the appearance of your hair is something that's attractive. Again, just using very poetic, flowery language to describe just the image of a person. So now Solomon would be speaking, how fair and how pleasant are you, O love, with your delights. The stature of yours is like a palm tree, and your breasts like clusters. I said, I will go up to the palm tree, and I will take hold of its branches. Now, let now your breasts be like clusters of a vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples, and the roof of your mouth like the best of wine. So again, people will read into this like this is at the consummation of the marriage, or it's the looking forward to it afterwards. It is, again, graphic. But reading more into it than that is, again, where people take it to, I think, extremes, is that there wouldn't be anything unholy or irreverent about this. It's just the expression of that longing for one another. Again, this is why it's idealistic. It's the way that it ought to be between husband and wife, but again, not reading too much in it. And this is where I basically say, man, if this is supposed to be speaking to me about Jesus and the church, this is where it gets kind of, you are way, way out over your skis on that if you're thinking that somehow all of this was written 3,000 years ago or 1,000 years before Jesus comes along on the scene, and now it's speaking, this whole book is really speaking about the relationship between Jesus and the church. Man, that whole theory falls apart here, but some people still insist. So he says, how fair and how pleasant are you, or you are, O love, with your delights. This stature of yours is like a palm tree, and your breasts like clusters. So through verse 9, and your mouth is like the best of wine. And then there is kind of, she speaks as he's saying these things and says, the wine goes down smoothly for my beloved. Move gently the lips of sleepers. I am my beloved's, and my beloved, and his desire is toward me. That's how you know that she's kind of interjecting this part. While he was speaking, she interjects this because she refers back to him. So in verse 11, come, my beloved. This is the bride. Once again, kind of looking back, or you'll see there's kind of a historical part of this. Come, my beloved, let us go forth to the field. Let us lodge in the villages. Let us get up early to the vineyards. Let us see if the vine has budded, whether the grape blossoms are open and the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes give off a fragrance, and at our gates are pleasant fruits, all manner new and old, which I have laid up for you, my beloved. All the preparation, and let's go see it. It's time. There's that anticipation of it. So, chapter 8, as we close out here, there is, again, remember we've looked at this earlier, where in the beginning parts of this. Again, what we studied last week, she recognizes that she's not of nobility, or so it would appear, because she looks at him as this king, and who am I that you've paid attention, kind of a thing. So she's one who takes care of her own flocks and all the rest of it, much smaller in number than his. And she finds that to be something that, I'm of a different station, of a different type than he is. So in this case, she reflects back on that a little bit, and she says, oh, that you were like my brother who nursed at my mother's breast. That idea, if it was common, if we had a common upbringing type of a thing, rather than you being a king and me being who I am, she said, I would kiss you, I would not be despised, I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, she who used to instruct me. I would cause you to drink of spiced wine, or of the juice of my pomegranate. So his left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. She's used that imagery at least a couple of times. And then the bride quotes what she's heard from him as she's kind of expressed this, who am I and who are you kind of a thing. She says, I charge you, this is him, he's speaking, and she's quoting him back to himself. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not stir up nor awaken love until it pleases. So once again, let everything be done in its proper order and proper time. And then she then goes back again, thinking back on how it was. And so this is what she recalls of the brothers speaking about her, how she's gone from this place of just being our young sister to this woman who now speaks to the king and is his one and only. So who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? They're wondering, when we look at our little, what we would think of as our baby sister, who is she now as we think about her? So as they say this, then Solomon chimes in and says, I awaken you under your apple tree. There your mother brought you forth. There she has borne you and brought you forth. Set me as a seal upon your heart and as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, and jealousy as cruel as the grave. It flames, and it flames of fire and most vehement flame. Now, she then speaks back to Solomon, saying this, many waters cannot quench love, nor can the flood drown it. If a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. So it's something you can't purchase. Basically, that's the point. This is what's different about them. And again, if she is of a lower station, as we might think of it, than him, then she's already kind of expressed that, who am I? But yet now, the idea that they have expressed love towards one another, it's something that can't be purchased. And so it's something that exists on its own. So, this is what, as she looks back, this is what she remembers of her youth and what her brothers would say of her at one time. We have a little sister, and she has no breasts, meaning she's just a child. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she is spoken for? About when she grows up? What are we going to do when the time comes that she's grown up? These seemingly older brothers are thinking of their younger sister, but she's not always going to be the little girl. What will be when she's grown? If she is a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver, and if she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. So we're going to support whatever she is, whatever she does. We're going to be there as support for it. And then she continues, I am a wall, and my breasts are like towers. Where they had said before, she's just a kid. Now this is her way of saying, but I am an adult. I've grown now. Then I became in his eyes as one who found peace. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Haman. He leased the vineyard to keepers. Everyone was to bring for its fruit 1,000 silver coins. My own vineyard is before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000, and those who tend its fruit 200. So she recognizes him and all of his greatness, and in the implied in this is of all the things that you ultimately have that people seek after, yet there's this place reserved for me that's outside of all of it. So the brothers then again, they're the ones here who speak. You who dwell in the gardens, the companions listen for your voice, and then she speaks as they're saying this. Let me hear it. What is it that they're saying? And then then she says this, I'm sorry, the bridegroom says this. Let me go back. I'm sorry, I just got them mixed up. Here's what the brothers say. You will dwell in the gardens, the companions listen for your voice. And then Solomon interjects and says, well, let me hear what that discussion is. And then she says this, make haste, my beloved, be like the gazelle or the young stag on the mountains of spices, which ultimately is the way that she described him initially. When she tried to talk about who he is and seeing Solomon, it's like he's like one of these fleet-footed, either like a stallion or a gazelle that's able to leap over the hills. So it's that hasten, come to me kind of a thing. So again, as we look through this, I'll just once again address the fact that I didn't spend a great deal of time working through this and trying to make a full accounting of it. I don't know that it could be done. I think, again, looking at it in the idealistic sense, what we have in 8 chapters, if we look at it as, here is the ideal. This is what it should have been through Solomon and one wife for their entire lives, and hopefully it would have ended that way. Then we can look at it a little bit differently. The trouble that we have with it is knowing what became of his life, so we don't say this is his actual lived experience, this is the ideal of what it should have been, though I believe that this is speaking literally of Solomon and literally of whoever this woman is, known as the Shulamite, and then the other participants who have words here and there that are involved in the whole thing. But the big picture of it, this is how husband should look at wife, wife should look at husband, and this should be something that's lifelong as far as the commitment is concerned. So that's how I read it, that's how I've presented it, and the other ways that it's been looked at just to me seem unsatisfactory. And again, the trying to make types out of things and symbols and metaphor and all the rest of that, there's plenty of usage of that, but to think that it's more than just description of one another, or of third parties looking at one or the other and saying what they say about them, to make it that it's speaking down through the ages and it was always intended to be symbolic of some relationship or another, God with Israel, Jesus with the church. Again, the idea that an entire book was written for something that wasn't going to come to pass until much later at a time, and yet be so cryptic that you can't really nail down what is meant by it. Just again, it doesn't fit. It doesn't work well. So going along the idea with types. Types are a very, very important matter, and Scripture uses them quite often. So the one that was used yesterday, I want to turn there. So go with me to the book of 2 Samuel, and we're going to be at chapter 12. And so the idea that the Bible speaks in types and metaphor and all that kind of stuff, I will never, ever dispute that. I believe that's the case. You'll hear me when we get to passages where that's used. We just looked at one here in the Song of Solomon. But again, the whole thing speaks that way. It is a description of the husband looking at the wife, wife looking at the husband, or the engaged looking to their partner that they're going to be wed to. And there's a lot of very poetic language. They're likening them to, you remind me of, and the teeth, the hair, the eyes, all the different things, these physical characteristics, and they're like this. So it's just basically, when I look at you, I'm reminded of this particular place that's beautiful, or it's wonderful, or it's really awe-inspiring, or whatever else. So that's pretty obvious as you're looking at it. There's not to be, I don't think we read too much into it. You can take a look at symbols and understand what they're literally trying to say. They're saying, literally, when I look upon you, I'm reminded of this. It reminds me, it's reminiscent of this. It's not mysterious. It's just using of poetic language. We do it all the time. In the cases where the Bible wants to tell a story, or give what is to be an illustration of an action or something, sometimes the thing that's being described is going to happen somewhere down the road. In this case, the idea of types, we have types mentioned all the time throughout Scripture. A great example is the offering of Isaac by Abraham. So they travel from the south up to what is modern-day Jerusalem, we believe. They came up to Mount Moriah, which we believe is Jerusalem, even the Temple Mount area. And here is a father willing to offer his only son as an offering to God. So you got a lot of types here. You have Abraham offering his son as a sacrifice. Where does that sound familiar? Okay, so we get that. The types are, Abraham is the type of the father, Isaac is the type of Jesus, the son, and God not wanting, God looking at it as a way of, he will provide for himself. When Isaac says, so who is going to be this sacrifice? God will provide for himself. And then there is a sacrifice that is made, but there's the obedience, the types of obedience that's there, that Isaac would consent to it. You got all kinds of great types that are going on in it, though it was a literal event. It happened. It really took place. In this case, we have another one. And again, with those types, the perfect of those types was still 2,000 years down the road. Remember, Abraham and Isaac are 2,000 years BC. Jesus is 2,000 years from us. So there's a 4,000 year spread from what we're reading there to our modern day. Jesus is right in between both in that 4,000 years. So the types of Abraham and Isaac were not fully realized until Jesus 2,000 years later. In this case, what Nathan is saying to David is giving him, in the same way, the use of types, and they're immediate. It's about an event that just took place. So in 2 Samuel, it's found in chapter 12. And this is how we can look when types are given. And the part 2 to this, which we'll look at on the Thursday study through Matthew, is the idea that in this case, when we compare it to the Abraham and Isaac, those types that were there were really wonderful ways of showing how God will provide for himself on behalf of others a sacrifice that will deal with what God expects as a perfect sacrifice. He will offer his son, that sacrifice will no longer be necessary. God will provide for himself something permanent. So in this case, we have something where it has a very negative way, these types, and that there's going to be a massive consequence for it. The consequence that we get from Abraham and Isaac, the consequence of the types, is that Jesus will come and pay with his own life for those that will put their trust in him. If there is consequence to it, there will be those who will reject, and they won't do as God has prescribed, and they'll have to deal with the consequences, though that's implied. It's not expressly said. Here, there is the types and the consequence. The type is obvious, the consequence is real, and it was realized in the life of David. We'll take on the second part of that when we get to it in the Matthew study, but they should be seen kind of side by side. So in chapter 12, what's already taken place at this point, if you remember, David goes out. He shouldn't have been in his house at the time when he sees Bathsheba in the area of the city below him. He should have been out with the nation at battle. They're at war, and he's not there. Instead, he's at his own house. He looks at Bathsheba, and he lusts after her. brings her to him. He commits adultery with her. She winds up pregnant. He's got to do something about it. He brings Uriah back from the front lines to spend the time with Bathsheba, and if they can have relationships, then David can say, well, the child is his. Well, he doesn't want to do that. How can I be with my wife when everybody else is at war? I should be with them. And he asks to be sent back. Well, David ends up ultimately having him put to death with Joab, put him in a place where he's not going to survive. And that's exactly what happens. And then David takes Bathsheba. She's pregnant. Okay. So all of that is taking place. Here's what happens when it all comes to light and God wants it confronted. So the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said to him, there were two men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The beginning of the types. In this case, the rich man would be David, the poor man would be Uriah. So types that are here, it's obvious when you look through it. Here's our possibilities. You have Uriah, you have David, you have Bathsheba. That's obviously the participants who are here. Now, the rich man had exceedingly many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except for one little ewe lamb, represented by, in this case, Bathsheba. So as far as Uriah is concerned, he doesn't have anything. David has everything you could imagine. Uriah only has this one, Bathsheba, only has one, and that's all that's there. So, and he had bought and that he had nourished, taken great care of her, and it grew up together with him and with his children. Now, nothing tells us that Uriah had children. It's just that the types are that this was very dear to him, so dear that he treated it as part of the family, this lamb. So once again, David sees this, it's kind of story. It's like some people might say in the New Testament, it sounds kind of it's parabolic. It sounds like a parable type of thing. We're trying to learn a spiritual lesson in this, but in this case, it's types, but really with the same way of illustrating something that's inescapable in its result. So it says, it grew up together with him and with his children. It ate of his own food and drank of his own cup, and it lay in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich man, who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd to prepare one for the wayfaring man who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb, and he prepared it for the man who had come to him. So the preparation means that you have taken, in this case, David, I want you to hear this. Nathan says, I want you to hear this. What would you think of this? So here's this man has a lamb, this ewe lamb. It's the only thing that he owns, and it's very, very dear to him, treats it like family. Now, there is this rich man who lives in the same city, and somebody comes from a distant way to come with him. And so hospitality would be, let's prepare a meal for them, a feast kind of a thing. Well, instead of going out to his many flocks, he has plenty of animals that could be taken and prepared and a meal made of them. Instead, he goes to this guy and he takes the only one that he has and prepares it and gives it to someone else. Now, you can see where the types are. It falls apart a little bit because Bathsheba wasn't killed and given to somebody else. They didn't make a meal of her. So the types you get where they're not supposed to be a straight across, it's supposed to illustrate a point. So what the rich guy ends up doing is taking the only thing that this guy has, and he prepares it and makes a meal for someone else rather than taking from his own flock. He wouldn't have even missed it. So if David is the one, obviously he is, represented by the rich man, he has so many wives, he has so many options. Going after Bathsheba makes no sense. She belongs to someone else, yet David's done this. Now, David doesn't even see that he's being spoken about here. So the traveler came to the rich man who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd, and he prepared for the wayfaring man who had come to him. But instead he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. So David's anger was greatly aroused against the man in this story. It's hypothetical. It's use of types. So he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this shall surely die. So there is at this point, David doesn't even understand that it's being spoken of in types. He's thinking that this is something that Nathan has said. Can you believe that a person actually did this? Because the story here is completely plausible. Somebody may have done this kind of a thing. Not realizing it's being said of David's actions in story type fashion, in types, David at this point is thinking that's how it ought to be. So David says, as the Lord lives, this man who has done this shall surely die. And he will restore fourfold for the lamb because he did this thing and because he had no pity. So everything that he says is rightfully what should happen to him. Adultery was punishable by the law. And the idea of restoration, if you've done something so wrongly, you're to replace what you've done by your actions fourfold. That's in the law. So everything that he says, if the story was true, David's reaction to it, here's what should happen to that guy, here's what the law says. He's going to have to restore it and he's to be put to death. He should surely die. All of that stuff's true. So Nathan said to David, you're that man. Now David looks at it and goes, but I didn't take somebody's, and then now it all starts to be the case. Nathan said to David, you are the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you to be king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house, your master's wives into your keeping, and I gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have given you more. So he is now confronted, and I want to pick back up on this on Thursday because there's some very interesting things that are being said here. And again, for those people who don't have a problem with polygamy, they'll point to this verse here as, see, God is okay with it. What we have here, again, is the incredible use of types. And this is one of those where types can be, here's what you've done, and now here is the consequence. And I wanted to really kind of drill down on this. Because again, if the Bible is speaking in types, it will become evident. In this case, clearly we understand the types. David, Bathsheba, and Uriah. Clearly that's the case. How do we know it's the case? Because now look at what Nathan is saying, and God is basically saying, you're the guy in this story. Nathan's already said it. You are this man. Now, what's going to happen from this point, God's going to confront him, and now the consequence to that is going to happen. So in the use of types, if the Bible speaks in types, just know that it will also be able to explain how the types operate and what is to be concluded, what's to be understood by those types. So we'll pick up on part 2 of this on Thursday. And how we'll do this in shorts, I guess we'll kind of do it as a part 1 and a part 2 in the shorts. And it is an important thing that we kind of take them together and understand them. We might just combine them into 2 pieces, but I didn't want to run very long with this. So if you have questions about any of this, and whether it's the types, the Israel trip, the study through the Song of Solomon, the conclusions, any of those kind of things, by all means, contact me through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net, and join us for all of our Bible studies. Given enough time, we will go through every book in the Bible. We will continue next week in the book of Isaiah. We start with the prophets. Very much been looking forward to this for a long, long time. I am thinking, if I'm not mistaken, it has been, gosh, it's probably 12, maybe 13 years since I taught this book, the book of Isaiah. Just as far as the church is concerned. It's been that long. So going to be an interesting trek through it. Hope that you can join us next week as we begin the book of Isaiah. And again, we appreciate having you with us, and pass the word around if you have friends and family that like to study the Bible, or maybe having trouble finding a place that does study all the way through the Bible. Give them the link to this. Obviously, it's all for free, and we do this simply because the Word of God should be known and passed around through the entirety of the church. So we'll see you on Thursday. Hopefully, you can join us for the book of Matthew as we go through the Sermon on the Mount. Very, very interesting things. Interestingly enough, we will be talking about the matter of adultery, and because David will be mentioned in this, Jesus mentions adultery in chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. So there'll be a kind of an interesting intertwining of these things. So hope you can join us for that. And again, any questions, contact us through the ministry's website, and we will see you for the next study.